Dan Rubenstein, week 8 was so dubbed Snake in the Toilet Saturday.
Snake in. Yeah.
Our Thursday preview episode. And as we come on the air this evening, it was a week in which number 1, number 7, number 11, and number 24 all lost. We will go through that and much, much more. It was an eventful week, not necessarily a ball of snakes, I think is the term for a group of them.
Sure. Or a den, whatever your preference is. Yeah.
Not necessarily a group of them jumping up and biting a bunch of teams, but as it stands, we got more phone calls to the Reverb line, which we'll get to a little bit later, than we have in a good long time. There were just a number of really interesting games and storylines and talking points and narratives to sink our teeth into. Teeth into.
No, Ty. Stick with teeths. That's you've been on this planet for 40 plus years, and this is where we've arrived.
To stick our teeths into. We're going to do our best over the next hour or so to walk you all through it, Dan. How you doing? What were your thoughts on today? You excited to get into this? Where do you want to start?
So my elbow has been sore for quite some time from tennis, from who knows what, from maybe sleeping wrong. But my arm soreness probably doesn't compare at all to the student section at Texas with the way that they were winging those bottles without stretching beforehand. Look, they tried their best to affect things in this game. It didn't quite work out. They affected a call, but, shout out to them. It's the prize of youth, right? That you don't have to stretch like an older guy like I do before you're winging beer bottles and water bottles onto a field of play. But, man, they're going to be feeling it in the morning. And it's a valuable lesson that resistance bands, proper warm-ups, that's the move, Ty, always.
Over the next hour or so, we're going to go through about the top 12 or so items that you need to know in order to feel a little bit dangerous on Sunday. Maybe as you go into the office on Monday, hang around the water cooler. If you're new here, hit follow or hit subscribe wherever it is you're listening or watching this podcast. We'd love to have you here in the Verballerhood the rest of the way. We got 3 episodes per week. If you go on out and sign up for any of our paid tiers at verballers.com, you can vote in our Verballer Top 12 poll, which that post is going to drop bright and early tomorrow morning. There will be some movement for sure. We'll talk about that and much, much more. And of course, disclaimer, anything we don't cover today, we're going to do our best to cover on the Tuesday episode, the spillover episode.
Yes.
Why don't we start with the Georgia-Texas game? It was the showpiece of the weekend. It was the big end, the one that everybody was talking about. It was the biggest night game in a pretty good slate of night games.
Yeah.
To be real, it was a pretty good slate of night games, but Georgia 30, Texas 15. Georgia jumped out to a very quick lead in this game, and then Texas did its part in the second half to try and claw back into it. They did gain some momentum in the early part of the second half, but then things started to stall out a little bit. And I think maybe just as a starting point, we can talk about how Texas could not block the Georgia.
Oh my God, no. Yeah.
And how that dictated their play calling, the pace of play, the mistakes, the uncharacteristic mistakes that we saw in this football game. It felt like if you watched this game, that was the thing you couldn't take your eyes off of. The fact that Texas was dealing with Georgia in the backfield nearly every play.
Yeah, and it wasn't the mistakes weren't limited to Quinn Ewers and what he was or was not able to do under pressure. Carson Beck was not good early on in this game. There was just full-on bad quarterback play for a variety of reasons, whether it was pressure, whether it was the back end of Texas's defense, which was quite strong early on in this game. Nobody really succeeded a ton through the air in this game. Georgia was able to adjust a little bit better and probably should have run a little bit more and gotten a little bit more creative with their run game. But no, this was a game just absolutely decided by the pressure and creativity of Georgia's defense. Texas not figuring out ways to get downfield and make adjustments on offense. The biggest adjustment they made was bringing in their backup quarterback in Arch Manning, but it did feel like it was a lot of dumping off just to avoid getting smashed in the backfield in this game. And so, we came into this game thinking, one of the strengths of this Texas team is what they're able to do on the offensive line in the way that they've been beat up at running back, guys step up with, Wisner most recently. The receivers have been getting loose with, Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning getting plenty of time. But man, Georgia came in with their hair on fire in Austin.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was impressive the way that Texas found a way to kind of claw back into this after halftime. It will remain a talking point, I think, that Arch Manning came in at the end of the first half, because at that point in time, Sark seemingly needed someone with mobility, right? They couldn't
down
block
20-0 at that time.
23-0 at halftime was.
Yeah. I know when he came in, I think it was 20-0.
20, yeah. So the fact that they brought him in hopes of maybe utilizing some of his wheels is meaningful, right? And I don't know if it's so much a knock on Quinn Ewers as it is just an inability of Texas to deal with what Georgia was bringing at them. There were also plenty of instances where they were getting that pressure without actually blitzing, and that made it a much, much more difficult task to try and move the ball on this Georgia front. Flipping gears a little bit, though, talking about what Georgia did on offense, 3 interceptions, as you mentioned, for Carson Beck.
Georgia sort of tinkering on offense a little bit against this Texas defense. And you're right. I mean, it looked like Carson Beck was going to throw for a ton in terms of attempts, but ultimately, it was Georgia capitalizing with opportunities that their defense was able to provide it. And Texas just, the kind of offense that Steve Sarkisian wants to run. That he wants to creatively get guys open downfield. And Arch Manning tried a little bit. And, there were guys that were open intermediate a little, but you're talking about guys that are open intermediate with Michael Williams' gigantic hand in your face. Yeah. And so kind of hard to parse out who is and isn't open in moments like that with that kind of pressure. So, no, to me, and I mentioned this to you, it was almost like Georgia hired both Alabama and Kentucky to hack into their team to expose vulnerabilities. Georgia looked like the more tested team going into this atmosphere, which was the clear game of the week. Texas had the drones forming. I don't know if you saw that in the second half, the drones forming the Longhorn artwork in the sky. This was enormous. And it's not Texas's fault that Michigan has fallen off to the degree that they have fallen off, but nobody has thrown a punch at Texas in the way, all due respect to Oklahoma, but they don't have an offense this year, right? And what Georgia was able to bring to the table was self-scouting that Texas just hasn't had the opportunity to do. I think Texas is going to get better from this point.
I think they are as well. I am curious to see how Georgia evolves, frankly. This will be something that we need to pay attention to now moving forward, because look, as we've been saying for a while, the SEC is kind of in a blender. I talked about it on the preview show pretty comprehensively to your chagrin, but the push-pull between the Georgia passing offense and the Georgia rushing offense, I think, is something that I want to watch, a little bit more closely. They before halftime still had some success running the football, and I don't know if they necessarily did enough of it. Finished the game with, I don't know, just over an average of 3 yards per carry, something like that. So that is one side of this whole Georgia conversation that I think we need to watch, because if they can achieve better balance, as I discussed on Thursday, that would make them a better team. But suffice to say, you go to Texas, you win the game by a 30-15 score. That's a pretty incredible win. It's notable. It's notable on the Texas side too that, one of the other things we brought up was who had Texas really played from an offensive standpoint coming into this game.
Sure.
What was there any kind of speed bump effect, anything culture shock, right? Of playing suddenly a team that was drastically better than those who had come before. Does that matter? Does it not matter? It may just be something idiots like us like to talk about, but it is times like these after a loss that you start to wonder.
I think the Texas offensive line was just tested in a way that they hadn't been. As good as Michigan's front, as good as Oklahoma's front is, I think the creativity of what Georgia was able to do up front. Like, how often does Georgia win a game in which its quarterback throws 3 picks? And I understand they still won the turnover battle. And how often does Texas lose a game in which they're able to force 3 picks? And it speaks to, I don't know, Georgia's ability to, to dig deep and stick to it, I guess. Like, there's a certain amount of resilience to Georgia, and This is a game that Texas doesn't lose 10 out of 10 times, but will lose 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 times starting like that. Like, you just can't come out of the gate that unprepared for what Georgia's going to be able to do up front and not be able to switch to a screen game, switch to the perimeter quickly and succeed. And Georgia's just better team.
They were the better team tonight for sure. But my final question on this game, then I want to move on because we got a lot to talk about this week. How far do you drop Texas? How far up do you move Georgia?
So where did they come in this game?
Well, Texas was 1, Georgia was 5 in the AP poll.
I would drop Texas to around 5, I guess. Looking at the rankings now, I'd probably go Oregon 1, Ohio State 2. I'd probably put Georgia 3. Does that make sense?
That's fair. I don't know if there's a right answer for it. You know, my suspicion is if I were voting, I will vote in our Verballer top 12 poll. I would probably put Georgia ahead of Penn State.
Yeah.
But the fact that Penn State, the fact that Ohio State, that Oregon all are still undefeated. Well, I guess Ohio State's not undefeated, but the fact that at least Oregon and Penn State are undefeated, that will probably carry some weight. The Ohio State question will be interesting, right? That was a 1-point loss. My hunch is they might still get the nod over Georgia even after this win, but it'll be interesting to see for sure.
I mean, Penn State has
get a bump.
Penn State has close wins against USC, who has a losing record, in Bowling Green, right? Close, narrow wins against those two teams.
Yeah, look,
USC, are they a 500 team? USC?
No, not at this point.
No, they're not. No, we'll get there.
We'll get there. All right. So Georgia wins 30-15, a very, very big tectonic win in the sport this weekend. It was, of course, the big headliner. Some other ones, though, and there were many. Tennessee 24, Alabama 17. This game, we did a live stream out on the YouTube channel and across Twitter X and Twitch and all sorts of places during the second half of this game. And it was kind of instructive for me to be on there with you, talking it through, kind of expressing our emotions about this game in real time. What I am left with is the fact that Bama increasingly feels like it is Jalen Milroe or bust.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever he can do, that's what the team is going to end up doing.
Yes.
And it's not necessarily his fault. It's just they're not effective at running the football. It seems like everything they're doing is flowing through him. And
throwing the ball at Ryan Williams. Yeah.
Throwing the ball at Ryan Williams with 18 targets in this game.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that plan is balanced enough to go through this schedule moving forward. It's definitely become more of a trend to see them sputter a little bit on offense than maybe what we thought 3 weeks ago. And on the Tennessee side, my thoughts on Tennessee were Nico still has a lot of growing up to do. Nico had plenty of issues in this game, overthrowing guys. He needs to work on that accuracy if Tennessee wants to aspire to be a playoff team, get into the playoff and win a game. But when push came to shove, in the biggest moment of the game, he hit Chris Brazzell on a beautiful slot fade that the camera didn't even know how to handle a pass that beautiful as Chris Brazzell reaches out, cradles it as he goes to the ground with it. And ultimately, Tennessee ends up winning this game at home. They light up the Cigars 24-17. What were your thoughts on this one?
Nico looked shaken a little bit in that first half. He did not look ready to rise to that moment. And he wasn't even that far off. Like, you just got a haircut, right, Ty? I'm sure you've gotten a haircut in which you've told the person that cut your hair, like, yeah, let's do a 2 on the sides. And then you get that 2 and you're like, I don't know if I'm a 2. I think we got to go a tick back. We're going to go to 3-4. That's where I am on the sides now. It feels like if you just adjust Nico to that 3-4, he's hitting so many balls, but he is overthrowing 30% too many open plays that you're just like, man, there's so much there. I think the difference between Tennessee and Alabama today is the fact that Josh Heupel has been there. This is a team he's built. This is a system that he's been able to make those tweaks from the 2s to the 3s to the 4s on the side of his proverbial system, right? And it's Dylan Sampson in the second half. It's the offensive line improving over the course of this game. It's the defense getting nonstop pressure on Jalen Milroe. It's playing to a vision. It's playing to a game plan. And what Tennessee was able to do in the second half is reflective of a coach and assistant coaches who've been there. And for as many throws as I'm sure Nico and the offense would like back, as you mentioned, when it counted, he was there. When it counted, when Jalen Milroe had opportunities, the defense came up big for Tennessee. They kept the Alabama offense in front of it. They were able to break up passes. They were able to get to Jalen Milroe. And like you said, they were able to force Alabama into being so one-dimensional that it's just impossible to win in that way against a defense as good as Tennessee's.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about Georgia trying to evolve its rushing game, maybe get back to where they have been, achieve a little bit more balance. That balance does not exist right now for Alabama. And it's kind of incredible to see because this is another program that used to rely on that. They can't run the ball. They can't run the ball, not with any kind of consistency. And so it truly is, as Milroe goes, so does Alabama. I'm struck by how ineffective they were on third downs in this game. That's not to say that Tennessee was a whole lot better. They weren't.
Right.
But Alabama going 3 of 14 on third downs, I think speaks volumes about the Tennessee defense. This was another game in which both teams were heavily penalized, but Alabama again dealing with 15 penalties for 115 penalty yards, a bunch of those coming at critical junctures within the football game. And of course, both teams in the same boat turning the ball over a bunch of times, but those two for, I think, Alabama ended up really coming back to bite them. So it just feels like they are not going to find that next gear. And I don't mean to write Kalen DeBoer off too soon, but clearly it feels like this is much more of a year one scenario for a new coach than we perhaps thought at the start of the year, just coming into the season. It's Bama. Right. Look at the roster. They've lost guys, sure, but it's still Bama, right?
It's a different version, and it's not fair, but it's fair at the same time, right? To put Alabama in this specific context of what we've seen from them these past 15 years or whatever, that we've come to expect a standard. And in any other scenario, we're talking about, I think Bama came in number 7 and Tennessee number 11. We're talking about a team that is pretty flawed on offense, all things considered, relative to performances earlier this year. And they're playing one of the best 2 or 3 defenses they'll face all year long. And they were winning in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
We're criticizing them as this is like a failed experiment. The Kalen DeBoer hire is a failed experiment.
I don't think it's a failed experiment.
No, I know, but like
it feels so foreign, right?
It feels foreign, but we're talking about, Alabama was so sloppy and they're building the whole thing out of Jalen Milroe and they can't figure out the running game and all these penalties. They were winning in the fourth quarter. They had an opportunity to tie this game late. And so if you are in your era of being off of your game and not being complete and not building out your team from the inside out like you've been doing in recent years, and yet you're in a position to win a top 12 game on the road in an extraordinarily hostile environment, I know there's no consolation prizes. I know there's no moral victories, but I don't know if we should start shoveling dirt on Alabama's season, Alabama's heights that they can reach with Kalen DeBoer eventually. But you're also not wrong that the way they lost this game was not befitting of a top 10 team.
Right now, as it stands, there are 2 remaining unbeatens in the SEC, and those are Texas A&M and the LSU Tigers, which is not anything anyone could have predicted. Certainly not A&M. We could talk about A&M maybe a little bit later on, but you do have this mishmash of teams now within conference play that have lost. Georgia, Tennessee, Mizzou, now Texas. Don't forget about the Vanderbilt Fighting Commodores. They're another one.
The Vanderbilt Fighting Commodores, yep.
Another team that kind of falls into that category by virtue of what they have done so far this season. Struggled a little bit with Ball State today.
Sure.
That being what it is. It's a very, very interesting SEC season in a way that I don't know any of us predicted. We will get into that, I think, in a little bit here. But your final score, again, was 24-17. Again, we did the live stream during this one. There were points during it that it almost kind of felt like an SEC or a Big Ten West game with how they were playing defense. But kudos to Tennessee, lighting up the cigars.
Huge.
Giving their fans something to cheer about.
Definitely.
Indiana 56.
Oh, man. Oh, my God.
Nebraska 7. Kurt Cignetti. I don't know if you saw Kurt Cignetti, but Kurt Cignetti the first play that he called, the first thing that he did in one of the biggest games in Indiana football history, at least recent history, was do a pregame interview with Jenny Taft in which he dropped the F-bomb. Just they had to bleep him out.
I didn't see that.
This dude has nothing but pure intensity coursing through his veins. The implication was if you win, it puts effing people in the seats. And he's not wrong. He's not wrong because Indiana was rocking in Bloomington for this game against Nebraska. They were a 6.5 point favorite. Indiana ran away with this game. It wasn't long before it started to feel like this one was getting out of control. All told, Indiana had 11 drives. You don't count the final drive where they essentially killed the clock. Nebraska only stopped them 3 times. Once on downs, once on an interception, and another on a punt. All told, 495 yards of offense, 56 points. Of note, Curtis Rourke did hurt his thumb. I think he lost
a nail, yeah.
Thumbnail, played a little bit maybe in the second half, but they sat him mostly for precautionary reasons per Coach Signetti. Sounds as if he'll be okay. They will have him moving forward. I am really struck by how calm. I mean, they said it on the broadcast. It's not so much my words as it was Gus Johnson and Joel Clapp, but they're not wrong. Curtis Rourke has been around. He's a 6th-year player. The quarterback, he seems very, very comfortable in this system, even on 4th down, even dealing with pressure. He is able to distribute the ball accurately, get it to where it needs to go with pace and on time, which is half the battle as a quarterback.
Yes.
That's half the battle. It's not just the passing game. They are firing on all cylinders with the rush.
Justice Ellson's so good.
He's so good. We talked about him a couple weeks ago, right? I mean, he gives them pop on the ground that I think is very, very underrated, despite the fact that so much of the conversation is on the passing attack. I will say what Indiana did defensively is something maybe we should talk a little bit more about. This is not to say that Nebraska is any kind of pyrotechnic offense, but as compared to some of the other teams Indiana has played, it definitely was a different kind of challenge. And one that I expected would go a lot differently than it did. We still thought Indiana would win, but I expected that Nebraska would put up much more of a fight. Not only would they be able to hold them down a little bit with their defense, but they'd be able to move the ball better with their offense. Indiana found ways to confuse Dylan Raiola. They made him look like a freshman.
Yeah.
Indiana came to play here. They looked prepared. They were making open field tackles. I mean, this was, again, it's against Nebraska, who might be a middle to upper class Big Ten team, but domination has really been the story of the year for Indiana. It has not been that just that they're winning these games. The difference between a BYU, let's say, and an Indiana, it's a stark contrast. BYU, in a couple cases now, has found ways just to scrape and claw and win. And I'm not comparing the two in terms of who would win if they played, but Indiana is going out there and they are beating the absolute brakes off of everybody they play.
Yeah.
There is now a question of, like, if we're talking to our kids about Indiana, as we like to do on this show, what is the context for that conversation, and how high should they be ranked now in light of this win?
I think they played like a top 10 team. They played like a team that didn't belong on the same field as Nebraska. Like, it was insulting. We watched Nebraska attempt to stop Indiana and move the ball against Indiana. Like, it very quickly became a waste of all of our time to hope that Nebraska could compete with Indiana, which is such a weird feeling in the Big Ten universe, that Indiana is wasting its time. They're not wasting its time, but that they're this formed. And I don't know how good Nebraska is. You say, middle class, maybe upper middle class of the Big Ten. Somebody drops 50. What was 56-7?
56-7.
The best you can say about Nebraska's tier right now is TBD. Like, they don't deserve any benefit of the doubt. Like, I know it's a freshman. I know that this is, a full rebuild job by Matt Rule, but this is year one of Indiana.
This is this
is not like a fully formed Indiana yet.
What this reminded me of, and it wasn't so long ago. My guess is it reminds you a little bit of this as well. But when Lance Leipold was getting things going at Kansas in year 2, in year 3, and Kansas very quickly went from being basically a laughing stock to a team that not only could compete but could beat you.
Right.
And it was clear if you watch those games, there was maybe a few smoke and mirrors. But by and large, it was a good team. They were well coached, and you could see it. Indiana, to me, feels a lot like that. Actually, they feel better because they're not using the smoke and mirrors. There weren't trick plays. There weren't any goofy scenarios in that game against Nebraska. They just kind of murdered them.
Yeah.
And so for me to kind of come to this place while watching this game, it's kind of a weird place to be where you're watching this and you're thinking, damn, Indiana actually is really good. These numbers that I'm seeing on the spreadsheet, these are legit numbers. Again, we got to see what they do against better teams on the schedule. They will have their opportunities, but Indiana's got a chance to win 10 games, Dan. And right now it feels like it's more likely than not after what we saw today.
They're 7-0 at the moment. Washington at home, winnable. Michigan State on the road, even with Michigan State's improved performance beating Iowa tonight, winnable. Michigan State has not been all that good this year. Michigan will fall out of the top 25. That game is in Indiana, winnable. After especially losing
with how they score
very
points,
little fight.
With how they score points.
Yes. Ohio State on the road. I'm not comfortable calling that game winnable for Indiana in this moment. I'm going to come down just a little bit from that high. And then the Oak and Bucket game at home, winnable. So, yes, anything at this point, I feel comfortable saying that anything less than double digits this year for Indiana, wild as that may sound.
Yeah, hey, whatever.
Is a disappointment. And not having Indiana in a playoff conversation in this moment seems kind of foolish.
Let's shift gears. Let's go over to the Big 12 if we can. I think a lot of the conversation around the Big 12 has been trying to put together a tier system now to help us understand it, because so much of the conference feels almost on the same plane. I personally have had a hard time getting behind BYU.
Sure.
Just have. I've looked at my sheets, and they're, at least in the early part of the season, it felt like what I was seeing on the field and the results I was seeing on the page were not matching up with some of the statistical stuff. Winning is a skill.
Yes, it is. I agree.
Winning is a skill. And BYU, I think, has, to their credit, gotten better. They have gotten more efficient as an offense. Jake Retzlaff has had a great season. He continues to improve week in and week out. And what we saw on Friday night, that game against Oklahoma State, was a very tough football team. I think I joked with you earlier, but this was one where I fell asleep early, woke up late, and caught the last 8 minutes or so of this game. And I thought they were dead to rights. Oklahoma State marched down the field. They had a 17-play drive. They ate about 8.5 minutes off the clock. They threw a short touchdown pass to Brennan Presley with about 1 minute and 13 seconds left. And it seemed as if there was no way, no how BYU could find a way to win this game. And sure enough, they marched down the field very quickly. They end up scoring a touchdown with, a couple seconds left. And they find a way to steal victory from the jaws of defeat, 38-35. Jake Retzlaff had a great quote. It's magical. It's spiritual. How can you not be romantic about this game? I mean, really good vibes right now if you're a BYU fan.
Yeah.
Especially when you kind of compare the vibes now to where things were at the start of the season. At the start of the season, there were big questions about quarterback. There were bigger questions about other position groups for sure. Mm-hmm. And certainly looking at the schedule looked like it was really going to be a murderer's row. And BYU has handled it incredibly well. Incredibly well. Now, to that point, they were sloppy in this game. There were more turnovers than usual in this game. For all intents and purposes, this was a clunker that BYU played that had a very dramatic ending. But winning is a skill.
Winning is a skill. And look who we have left on their schedule. A UCF team that can't quite figure out how to win. If you watched any bit of their game tonight, a ton of huge plays from both Jakari Brown and RJ Harvey. Yes.
Yeah.
Couldn't make it count ultimately as Iowa State comes back. Utah seems more winnable. It's on the road though, but they have a bye before that week in the Holy War. It's an Isaac Wilson Utah. They're playing right now against TCU. I don't have a score of Utah TCU in this moment. At Arizona State, we'll see what Sam Leavitt's health is in that moment. Kansas, okay, maybe a little bit better. And Houston. There's a lot. BYU is likely going to lose a game or two, okay? But you can't get away every week with, what was it, 38-35, Oklahoma State needing to come back and overcome not penalties, but turnovers.
Yep.
But I don't know, man. It's just sometimes there's just the pixie dust falls on your team, and the pixie dust is falling in Provo, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. It's a great thing to have happen to your team. And as you would probably attest, you would have loved a little bit of pixie dust in that NIU Notre Dame game. Let's just win with a little bit of luck this week, guys.
Well, look, you'll take luck however you can get it. It's a long season. It's a long season. Iowa State also survived 38-35, and they were down 28-14 midway through the third quarter. This was one of my money bets that I posted online. I was sweating this one. I didn't win the bet. I didn't even come close to winning the bet. They're lucky they won the game. But as you said, gave up a ton of big plays on defense. Also threw a pick six. They almost had another pick six that UCF took, ran with, dropped before the end zone, got the ball back, and then scored a touchdown.
It was they got it back because they didn't rule the ball being fumbled and recovered. Yes,
correct. Yeah. So a very fortuitous circumstance for UCF to even have the ball, to have an opportunity to punch it in and score the touchdown to get it to 35 points at all. But this is another case of UCF finding a way not to win. And Iowa State at home, playing in a clunker, falling behind early, staying the course, finding a way to kind of see this thing through and remain unbeaten. As it stands right now, there are only two unbeaten teams in the Big 12. They are BYU and Iowa State. And after that, you've got three teams tied with one loss in conference. Kansas State, who absolutely rolled West Virginia. That game was just destroyed.
Avery Johnson's powering up, Ty.
I know.
Powering up.
I'd play my sound, but I don't want to dwell too much on this. It was just a total beatdown of West Virginia in Morgantown at night. A very nice win for K-State. Texas Tech only has one loss in conference. That's against Baylor, right?
It wasn't just a loss. I mean, if you're going with the theme of teams getting stomped, Kansas State did some stomping. UCF did some stomping in a losing effort, and Iowa State won in a losing effort. Everybody tried to lose that game somehow, some way, but you're absolutely right. Texas Tech only one loss, but hey, Baylor, welcome.
Baylor destroyed them. And then Cincinnati and Colorado. Those are your final two teams that have one loss.
Colorado stomped Arizona, and Cincinnati playing Jeff Sims ASU, who wasn't like as bad as Jeff Sims was at Nebraska, at least. And Paul Tyson got going. Cam Scattaboo made plays. Cincinnati, Brendan Sorsby has been like very quietly very good for the Bearcats this year.
Let's shift over to the ACC, where it seems as though we know the top two teams in the conference. I don't know if there's a whole lot of mystery that it is Miami and Clemson at this point that are seemingly on a collision course. That was solidified today, given the fact that Miami knocked off Louisville, gave Louisville another loss. It feels as if these two teams are headed towards each other. The Miami-Louisville game earlier in the day might have been the craziest game of the day.
I mean, from the jump, Joe Test was reacting to like 4-yard gain for Miami.
He was doing the WWE gig.
Yeah.
While he was calling this game. It was extremely intense.
Yeah.
I hope he's okay. I like Joe Test.
Oh, he's great. Yeah.
But this was a wild game. This is a wild game. There wasn't a whole lot of defense in this game.
No.
Certainly not in the second half. Cam Ward had 4 touchdowns. Cam Ward in this game showcased all the things that I think make people really excited to watch Cam Ward. And it's not a surprise at this point. They talked on the broadcast about how he's giving the team leadership that it hasn't had in a while. It could just be that he's giving the team skills that it hasn't had in a while.
Yeah.
Right? That plays a role in leadership as well. And so he certainly has that part of it. But it's another game. I hate to kind of water down the win by saying this, but there are a couple games, 2 in particular on Miami's schedule moving forward, where they're on the road and you can envision another close circumstance. I feel like at this point, Miami is very well positioned to be a playoff team. I feel like Miami, even with a loss, given where the ACC is at,
right,
is going to find its way into that ACC title game, most likely against Clemson. All right. But I just wonder how many more of these Miami can pull out. How many more of these can they pull out? Now, they got a good amount of separation late in this game. All right. The final score was 52-45. It's not like Louisville was a play or two away from winning this game.
Right.
Miami hit the gas. They ended up pulling away, and then they just held on. All right. But I watched this game, and we've talked about this now a couple times. I just worry. I worry that this version of Miami is going to find a way to get into one of these road games, and they're not going to find their way out. Thankfully, they got Cam Ward, and he can paper over a lot of things. But at some point, one of these games is going to come back to bite him.
I understand what you're saying, but like, whose defensive front is going to give Miami trouble? Like Georgia Tech's, Duke's, Syracuse?
It was supposed to be Louisville. Louisville was supposed to be the one.
I agree. And they did. They did give him some trouble.
They gave him some trouble. And they were able to get pressure on Cam Ward in spots in this game. And that did kind of change the dynamic a bit. So that line is what I was looking at a couple of weeks back when we were trying to figure out where are the potential landmines for the Canes. Having gotten over this hump now, it's a fair question to ask. And I don't know if there's an obvious answer to it. But that being said, I mean, had trouble with Cal, had trouble with Virginia Tech. The Virginia Tech game was at home, right? Yeah. There are some games now on the road the rest of the way that I could kind of squint and see another game like this where Miami is playing for its life.
But I still think, like, look, if they lose to Duke, they lose to Duke. If they lose to Georgia Tech, they lose to Georgia Tech. If they lose to Syracuse, they lose to Syracuse. They're losing one of those games max to me.
I agree.
Just because the way that offense operates, with how hard Damian Martinez runs, with like the immediate chemistry between Cam Ward and Xavier Restrepo, and now it was Sam Brown, the Houston transfer, had a great touchdown catch. Like, they could win one of those games 14-10, and it could be ugly, and it could be weird. They could have to come back against Syracuse. That's in the JMA Wireless Dome to finish out the season. All that matters right now is Clemson. And so you can say and be right, like, this thing about Miami is terrifying, that they're giving up these long runs, or that they're losing guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, downfield. And that worries me against, Bryant Wesco or whoever for Clemson. But at this point, Miami would have to be part of such a full collapse to lose two games with what the rest of their schedule has.
Oh, I agree. I completely agree. And I stand by what I said on Tuesday. Miami gets in as an at-large with one loss. They're going to lose one of these. I'm sorry. They're going to lose one of these games. They're going to lose to Georgia Tech. They might lose to Syracuse on the road to close out the season. But they're finding their way into some of these games where they have to pull a stunt late in order to get some separation. And it's happened a couple times over now. It's just part of their identity. It's a very good team. And I picked them to win the ACC. So if it happens, I'm kind of right one way or the other. I'm in good shape. But I'm just looking at the schedule, and I don't like these away spots. I don't.
Watching Miami fans, remember the old Gallagher? There were two Gallaghers. I don't know if
where he smashes the watermelon.
Smashes the watermelon, right? Where there's just like a new stunt every time Gallagher's doing something. And everybody out there that watched Comedy Central at midnight in 1991 knows what I'm talking about. Such a very specific reference. But there's always something with these Miami games. There's always something. There's a kick return for a touchdown out of nowhere. There's a weird penalty that's reviewed for 14 minutes. There's always something with these Miami games, which is why I think you're right, that there is a decent shot that something weird is going to lead to them losing one of these games. And I don't think it'll ultimately matter.
It won't. And look,
at least as regards to getting to the ACC championship game.
In regards to getting to that title game.
Yeah.
It's also really unfair for me to frame the conversation this way.
Yeah.
Because this was a fun game. Miami had all of its key talent on display. It wasn't just Cam Ward. It was Xavier Restrepo. Truly, this is a good team. And to be at this point, 7-0, 3-0 in conference, to seemingly be on this collision course with Clemson, I realize by saying that I'm probably doing a bit of a disservice to SMU, who I ultimately think will get into that playoff game, or into that conference championship game, and be left off the playoff. And Pitt remains unbeaten in conference, unbeaten overall. there are 4, I think, pretty good teams atop the ACC at this point. 2 that I think are a cut above the rest. It's going to work itself out over the next 3 weeks or so. I mean, we're going to.
Who does Clemson finish with quickly?
Clemson finishes with it. I mean, it's an interesting slate the rest of the way for the Clemson Tigers.
So they have Pitt, but everybody else is lost.
They've got Louisville in a couple weeks, at Virginia Tech, at Pitt, the Citadel, and South Carolina.
Wow. So then SMU finishes also with Pitt. So Pitt will have opportunities.
The biggest game. Hear me out.
They don't play each other.
They don't. And this is why I kind of favor SMU to get to that title game if my theory holds of Miami dropping one. But SMU has a big game on November 2nd. It's the game that nobody is talking about. They are at home and they are hosting Pitt. The winner of that game stands to gain an awful lot. I agree. Lot. So just kind of have that one circled. It's not going to make headlines. There are other bigger games that weekend, namely Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, Michigan. Yeah, I guess Oregon, Michigan doesn't mean as much as it used to.
Right.
But that Pitt SMU game in the ACC in the title match, or title chase, that matchup means a lot.
Yeah, I'm not a huge believer in Pitt at this juncture, just seeing how some of their close wins those teams have fared, namely West Virginia and Cal. But Pitt has the opportunity with Clemson and SMU on the back half of their schedule. It'd be fascinating.
Dan, would you like to play a game of hey, how much is that guy's buyout again?
Oh God, this is gonna hurt me, but yes.
How much is Lincoln Riley's buyout? Any idea?
You told me this, and all I remember was it was like Jimbo-esque.
$88 million. Dan, that's a lot of potatoes. USC is now 3-4. Yeah. They dropped the game on the road to Maryland. We were watching this. I threw 5 whole American dollars on the Maryland live line at the time, which was plus 13.5, which in retrospect felt like it was shooting fish in a barrel.
I must have been very convincing when I was like, look, if this game is close near the end, USC's losing. That must have been very convincing.
USC did lose. I don't know how we even talk about this team at this point. I can only imagine how frustrating it is if you are a USC fan to see these close losses. I mean, we joked on the stream that we did that Lincoln Riley can now say they lost 4 games by 6 points or whatever
yeah, it's like 14, but yeah, at this point,
whatever it is, they can't get rid of them. I don't think they've got that kind of money. I don't think they've got that kind of desire to cut the cord at this point. What next? Like where, what, how, who, what do you even say?
There are certain positions they can get better at in the portal. We saw what they were able to do with Jordan Addison a couple of years ago. They can get game changers there. You can get a premium receiver in the portal, and we've seen it this year. We will see it every year, that those types of players will command money, and USC will find a way. Are they a Miller Moss team next year? I think he's still eligible next year. He's a pretty good quarterback. I don't know if he's an excellent quarterback.
He's been good. Okay. He hasn't had a lot of time.
He has not had a lot of time. And to build that offensive line into something that resembles what Lincoln had at Oklahoma, it seems like it's going to take time from where they are right now. That's something that you just can't solve in the portal. And to build up depth on defense, it just seems like you need to build that up in really aggressive recruiting classes. USC's recruiting in the South. This is more of an off-season topic, and letting a bunch of other places just pillage top talent on the West Coast, places that they used to have. And so you see them look tired at the end of these games. They don't have depth on this defense. Even though they improved on defense, Maryland was moving the ball. They weren't doing a bunch the first half of this game, but they were moving the ball as things got tight in this game. Billy Edwards was making plays with his feet, making plays with his arm. Roman Hemby was getting out and getting key first downs. This USC team just looked tired. They look thin and tired. They're beat up in their front with Anthony Lucas and Eric Gentry out. And they have good players on offense, but they don't have game changers. Maryland's not that good this year. I'm not trying to put them down on a day where they, rushed the field and had this big game. USC should not be losing to Maryland. Flying across the country, I don't care. Like the type of guys they have on this offense, the Lincoln Riley's successes in the past on offense, like this is embarrassing for USC.
Yeah.
To have lost to Minnesota, to have lost to Maryland, the way that they did to Penn State, the way that they did to Michigan, you can say that they're this close to like a much more impressive record, but you need to have the skill of winning games that USC, they just don't have that in their DNA at all.
They don't, and I think it's only further emphasized by the fact that they lost a quarterback like Caleb Williams. They're still kind of digging out for.
He went 7-5 last year, didn't he?
He went 7-5 last year, but it was pretty much all on him. And I don't know if you can lean on Miller Moss the same way.
Of course not.
Caleb Williams, right? I mean, if you try to do that again, now maybe they're a little bit better rushing the football this season, but the calculus is different. It is not the same as a year ago. That's part of why USC's over-under was lower. Depends where you got it. You might have got it at 7.5, 8. But right now, you're kind of pushing the limits of whether or not that's something that's going to catch, because looking at the rest of the schedule, I mean, there are more losable games on here if this is the version of SC.
They might not make a bowl game tie.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
I mean, look, Nebraska didn't belong on the field with Indiana, so maybe they can beat Nebraska. Like, I don't know. Any given week, USC can lose to most teams in this conference.
Florida State's Mike Norvell, his buyout is $65 million, Dan.
Man. Florida State, Friday night, Duke?
Yeah. Florida State dropped to 1-6. They lost to Duke, who, by the way, is 6-1. As a Duke fan wrote into us, hey, we're the worst 6-1 team ever, but you're going to a bowl, my man.
Great.
You're going to a bowl. I don't know what the appetite is to get rid of a guy like a Mike Norvell. Mike Norvell almost
not going anywhere.
Mike Norvell almost got that Bama job, right? Mike Norvell is, I think, still pretty highly respected, but this has definitely been a bit of a collapse, to absolutely say the bare minimum. One more loss, they are not going bowling. It has been horrible on offense. The DJU thing has been a disaster, and now he's hurt. So this has just been a full-on tire fire, as we like to say on this show. $65 million probably keeps him there. My guess is if we've got another season next year like we've got this, that might be the moment when they cut the cord. It is a crazy time in college football. When
are they going to raise money? Are they going to go to Saudi Arabia to raise money to fire Mike Norvell?
That's what I was wondering. I mean, it might take something like that if they want to do it this year.
Oh my God, the Seminole Sovereign Wealth Fund. Yeah.
Oklahoma. Brent Venables, his buyout is $45 million. They got drilled. Drilled by South Carolina at home.
Mm-hmm.
So Michael Hawkins Jr., who made headlines having gotten that job after they benched Jackson Arnold, he started the game 3 for 5 for 18 yards and 2 picks. Then they bring Jackson Arnold in.
Yeah.
Notably now, he has burned his red shirt. So if that's something that he cared about, that's gone. Mm-hmm. It was fine, but again, at this point, the game's out of hand. South Carolina won this game going away. It doesn't feel like a quarterback thing to me. They can play this quarterback bingo as much as they want. They're really still hurt out wide. That doesn't help. Play calling, suspect. Offensive line, very suspect. This is an offensive line thing first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
And we gave Bill Biedenbaugh a lot of credit, I think, coming into the season that he would figure out the line thing because he's very good at doing it. That just has not taken. So Oklahoma finds itself in a world of hurt. This is a really bad offense, Dan. A really bad offense, a team that has, I think, a pretty good defense, but there's only so much a defense can do with no help whatsoever from the offensive side of the football.
No. And look, you're right about the different factors at play here. That Jackson Arnold didn't work out and he was the quarterback of the future, and the line has been a disaster and the receivers have been super beat up. It just feels like, how long is Brent Venables? This is his 3rd season there.
Yeah.
There isn't a ton of depth at quarterback. Obviously the depth at receiver has been hit. It doesn't seem like they've been super creative. And honestly, for all of what was the final score here? 35-9. South Carolina. South Carolina was scoring on defense. Their own offense wasn't incredible against Oklahoma.
No.
And that final score makes it seem as if Oklahoma didn't belong on the same field. Oklahoma has one side of the ball pseudo figured out. They're still building up depth there. They're still looking for star power there. And there is some star power there on defense. But to have one side of the ball completely fall off like this, and the receiver injury thing is just bad luck. Offensive line has not gotten better over the course of the time that Brent Venables has been in Norman. And that Jackson Arnold hasn't worked out. They see him in practice. The part of me just like, you've probably seen that he's not the guy in practice. And yet, here we are with no plan other than a freshman.
Hey, 3 other ones.
Please.
Sherrone Moore's buyout is only $5 million, Dan.
It's an interesting conversation, but I don't know. I think you have to give any coach in the shadow of what he is following a little more time than a year, right?
This is me shrugging.
I know. I understand.
21-7. The offense is a problem. Look, it's not just a quarterback thing. It's finding the big plays. The quarterback, I think, is always going to get the most attention, and it's certainly not good at this point. They went to Jack Tuttle. He at least threw for more yards. But in terms of actually moving the football with any great degree of success against Illinois, we were doing our stream during this game, and they were down 21-7, and it just felt completely hopeless, like they might have any opportunity of coming back in that game. It was just full stop. It's not going to happen.
Right.
And that's a very, very frustrating place to be. What I can't really comprehend is the fact that they're having a season like this on offense, having just won the national championship.
Yeah.
And there's certainly something to be said for losing the coach and losing the quarterback and turnovers.
Losing Jesse Minter, their defensive coordinator. Like, they lost a ton. Yeah.
They lost a ton. All right.
Strength coach. Yep.
A fair amount back, but still losing a lot. Right. And so that you need to kind of bake that into the cake. But to not have a better option at quarterback, I don't know. That feels like a big miss. It just feels
what was he supposed to do? So Jim Harbaugh is the head coach of Michigan when the portal opens last year. And you're going to go get Curtis Rourke. You're going to go get Will Rogers. You're going to go get Kyle McCord or something, like some portal success story at quarterback. And you're going to say, come to Michigan. And then they're going to say, so you're going to be back next year. And Jim Harbaugh is going to say, who's to say? I don't know.
Whoa. You mean to tell me they couldn't have got a quarterback, even in that scenario? If Michigan comes calling for a transfer quarterback, this is a Michigan team, Michigan program that just won the national championship.
Sure.
You don't think they're going to find anybody solely because there's some uncertainty who's the coach is going to be?
That's more than just uncertainty.
You don't think that they could find, and also the other side of this argument. Okay, well, I'll grant you that.
Sure.
The other side of this argument is they knew what they had here.
That's true.
They knew what they had here. There has to have been somebody who would have signed on at Michigan. Has to have been somebody.
Oh, I'm
going to a season with Jack Tuttle and Alex Orji and a former walk-on. That was the plan. I'm sorry, that is not a good plan.
Well, the other question is Michigan a school that is willing to say, yeah, we'll pay a quarterback $1 million? Is that Michigan's NIL vision, that we have the money and we are willing to spend that kind of money on a portal quarterback? Will Rogers committed to Kalen DeBoer and then decommitted when Kalen DeBoer left Washington for Alabama. He happened to come back after the fact, but that's a smaller scale situation than Jim Harbaugh. Will he, won't he? I mean, Kalen DeBoer going to Alabama is a huge deal, but it's not like every school in America was dying to have the services of Will Rogers. So my question to you is, like, Michigan losing Jim Harbaugh is an enormous deal. And there is such a robust market for a quality portal quarterback that you lose this huge name. Look, who did Alabama lose in the portal when Nick Saban lost? They lost their quarterback of the future, right? Transferring to Ohio State. So it's just like, there's such a risk there or not risk, but like the opportunity to me it's just so low when there's that much uncertainty given when the portal timing is.
I can't get it through my head that they won the title. And I understand that there was turnover, that they can't get a better quarterback. I don't know. I just wonder if there was some wishful thinking here that it would work out with Alex Orji or somebody else, and it didn't.
Ty, your school went 4-8. My school went 4-8. These things happen to major programs, and maybe less in the portal era.
Look, it's happening to Florida State now.
It's happening to Florida State as we speak. Nobody's immune. Maybe Georgia's immune, but like maybe Ohio State's immune. But what did they do with Luke Fickell that year when they just had unfortunate circumstances? Like sometimes it's just going to be that year for these schools.
I don't expect that Michigan would cut ties with Sharon Moore so quickly. But
I think
just noting the buyout. We're playing the buyout game. Here are two that I think could happen.
Okay.
And then we're going to move on. Okay. We've got more things to discuss. Mark Stoops' buyout is $4 million at Kentucky. With some of his public comments, my sense is there is frustration there. And it does not seem like Kentucky is on any kind of upward path at this point.
Tried to take the A&M job.
Tried to take the A&M job. They lost to Florida pretty handily today.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if Purdue's got $9.3 million laying around, but it does not feel like the Ryan Walters situation at present is very sustainable. Now, granted, played Oregon. Oregon might be the number one team in the country at some point tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah.
It feels like that is a bad situation. Had a game a week ago where they scored a lot of points in the second half and it was fun. Still lost.
Got shut out against Oregon as well.
Shut out. It's just $9.3 million for Ryan Walters.
I mean, in a situation like Walters, there has to be a reason for optimism that you have to see. You have to squint and see the light at the end of the tunnel, whether it's recruiting, whether it's close losses, whether it's a specific position group getting way better. And I guess you could point to the second half of the Illinois game. That's the only thing you can point to essentially this season against a quality opponent, saying like, oh, there's something there. Yeah. And then they put up 0 points the next time they played a quality opponent 6 days later. And so I don't think that's a ton of money if you're in the Big Ten. Isn't that the whole point of being in the Big Ten? That you can write checks or co-write checks with a booster or 3 to take care of a situation and pay Ryan Walters not to coach. They've had 3 play callers in a week, 2 weeks. Ryan Walters took over play calling. He has a defensive background and took over the offensive play calling.
Yeah.
By the way, that whole broadcast was a nightmare. The refs were a nightmare in that game. Dylan Gabriel got called for intentional grounding when he threw a ball deep and a receiver cut in and like came back for a pass. And the refs were like, oh, it's intentional grounding. You're like, he just had a miscommunication with his receiver. He wasn't being pressured.
Are they taking the money away from the refs and giving it to the conferences or funneling it somewhere else? Because I feel like the officiating this year has been universally bad. There have been bad calls.
It's been real weird.
Ever remember. And not just bad calls on unreviewable plays.
Yeah.
I'm talking about going to the video monitors and still coming back with what looks like the wrong call. Or in some cases, more frustratingly, not going to the video monitors at all. It's sort of confounding with how the sport has now suddenly almost like meteorically risen through this era, into this era of big money, that's the one aspect of things that feels like it's actually gotten worse. Very strange.
And if you're worried about games lasting longer, what's a better opportunity to show another Dr. Pepper commercial than a review, right? Then it's never been easier.
Everything has gotten better, but the officiating.
And it's never been easier to have an earpiece in your ear and have somebody in the stadium, in conference headquarters say, actually, hold up, we're going to review that last play, right?
Yeah, I don't
it's
get it.
It's never been easier to communicate that desire.
It's like they're waiting for the messenger pigeon to come down from the press box. Just have the buzzer. I don't get it.
Yeah,
I don't get it. I don't get it.
Oregon looked okay. Their defense looked strong. Purdue ran a little bit. Dylan Gabriel came out right away and was very good. They had a stretch where they didn't do much on offense. They played a bunch of their 2s and 3s on defense, and it was still a 35-0 win. It was a Tim Brando game, by the way.
Oh, boy.
I have nothing but respect for Tim Brando and his ability to sit down in that announcer's chair with the game about to kick off and say to himself, all right, who do we have playing this week? Who's on this team now? What are we doing? It's the best. It's the absolute best.
Is sort of freelancing. It's a little bit of Mad Libs going on.
There's it's an improv game to Tim Brando. It's great. Who do we have? Oregon, Indiana, Oregon, Purdue. All right, let's have fun out there.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's great.
It's so bad. It's so bad.
Mm-hmm. What are you gonna do next? Where are we going?
Let's talk about some lurkers, man.
Oh, let's.
Some other lurkers. Look, I didn't know how to classify these teams, but I feel like they're lurking.
By the way,
I don't think that highly of Mizzou, but they're lurking. They got one loss.
You know what? That's a hell of a win.
It
That's an
is.
ugly game between Mizzou and Auburn. That's a losable game to Auburn. And Brady Cook leaving, coming back, Drew Pine coming in, Brady Cook doing with his legs, doing with his arm. Like, that was such a clunk of a win.
So,
I have nothing but respect.
Hold on. There are two things that we need to talk about here.
Please, let's go.
Mizzou, number 19, they beat Auburn 21-17.
Came back. Yeah, fourth quarter.
First off, the rest of their schedule, they've got Bama on the road next week, which who the hell knows?
Yeah, great.
Also got Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. Those are 4 winnable games. Right now, they got 1 loss.
Yeah,
Not
South
a great
Carolina,
loss.
we'll see. But yeah.
Brady Cook was out for a while. It looked like it was some kind of ankle injury, which meant, yes, we saw Drew Pine.
Your boy.
My boy. Drew Pine was in there for a little bit. I saw some Mizzou fans joking online. Why are we throwing more with Drew Pine than Brady Cook?
Yeah.
Please don't do this to us. Eventually, Cook came back in. Mizzou ends up scoring 15 points in the fourth quarter. I think a straight up push if you got this line at 4. Here are the interesting nuggets, though. Brady Cook got hurt. Brady Cook actually went to the hospital during the game for an MRI. Jeez. And then came back.
We're cool. Okay. Yeah.
Came back from the hospital, was reinserted into the game, helped Mizzou win that one again, 21-17. The other interesting factoid from our friend Justin Ferguson over at the Auburn Observer.
Yes.
Auburn's offense in this game had 12 drives against Mizzou. They went 3 and out 5 times, 4 and out once to end it.
Mm-hmm.
On the 6 other drives, they had 4 possessions with a first down inside Mizzou's 40-yard line and scored exactly 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
On the remaining 2 drives, they had a big play touchdown and a fumble.
By the way.
And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
Coming off a bye.
Coming off a bye.
Silver
lining, that big play touchdown to Cam Coleman, gorgeous.
Very good.
An absolute stunner of a pass and catch to Cam Coleman. He's going to look stunning in a different uniform in 2 years.
I like this. Don't count Mizzou out of anything. All right. There might be another loss in there. This is obviously not a fully formed product at this point. I think we're learning that, but just bear in mind, schedule is workable, and they showed some grit in winning this game. So that's one.
I agree.
Despite the fact that you and I were pretty high on Arkansas, LSU destroyed Arkansas.
Bad pick from me. Hand up. Bad pick from me.
LSU destroyed Arkansas 34-10. I've got LSU down in the lurker category. I don't feel like enough people are talking about LSU right now. Now they will.
What's the rest of their schedule?
They will. They will real soon, Dan. Very soon, because LSU's got a game against Bama coming up. That I think is going to be a very big deal for them. LSU's got a game against Texas A&M coming up, which I think is going to potentially have some real world playoff implications. That game is on the road next week in Kyle Field. They've also got a game later in the year on the road at Florida. That game's always weird. Yeah. And Florida actually looked okay today. They got Vanderbilt, Dan.
I saw DJ Lagway was like 6 of 16 for 283 yards.
Yeah.
Like if it's going well for DJ Lagway, it's going crazy well. If it's not, it's a disaster.
Scored a lot of points, and you know what? The defense was okay.
Yeah, they were.
Just LSU, top 10 team.
Yeah.
LSU not getting the credit I think it deserves. I'll put number 12 Notre Dame as a lurker.
Okay.
Notre Dame right now, probably more so than any other team in college football, has an inside track to getting into that playoff. They needed to win this game against Georgia Tech, and they did. Now, there was some disagreement among our verballerhood as to whether or not Riley Leonard is getting better, is the quote-unquote guy, should be the quote-unquote guy. That I feel like Riley Leonard is going to provoke this discussion
This is like when half of the office said Hillary Swank is good looking and half of the office said
It's
she's
exactly
not.
what this is.
Okay, everybody's looking at the same situation and feeling
This
very
is an
differently
equal
about it.
test.
Yeah.
How you feel about Riley Leonard says more about you than it does him. This offense is not going to be your standard issue anything. It's going to be a lot of calling Riley Leonard's number. It's going to be a lot of getting Jeremiah Love out to the edge as best they can. It's going to be hopefully more of what we saw today, which was getting Mitchell Evans the ball, their big tight end. But if it doesn't feel like it is anything you can really sink your teeth into and know what the identity of it is beyond Riley Leonard, you are in the same boat as the rest of us. I don't know what the offense is either. The defense is still pretty good despite the injuries. Their schedule the rest of the way, they got Navy next week in East Rutherford, New Jersey, neutral site. They've got Army eventually, neutral site game. They close out the year against USC on the road. All of these games are very winnable. All these games are very winnable. Notre Dame is what we think they are. They should be winning out, finishing 11-1 and going into the playoff as probably a top 8 seed. Lurking.
Yeah.
Number 21, SMU hammered Stanford.
Lurking.
We talked a lot about SMU on the Tuesday show. We talked a lot about them earlier. I won't dive too deeply into that, but hammered Stanford is just sort of plugging along. A classic ACC rivalry against Stanford.
At classic SMU Stanford in front of, there are dozens of us people in Sanford Stadium. Yeah.
How about Duke lurking?
Duke's,
How about Duke? I don't know if they're lurking.
Yes.
They're 6-1. They're going to a bowl. How about Cincinnati lurking? Cincy 5-2. We mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
They beat Arizona State. By the way, on the Arizona State side, they missed 2 field goals. Kenny Dillingham said after the game on Monday, they're having open tryouts for a new kicker.
The best.
We have to draft this one of these years for the fantasy things.
Have we not already?
Drafting open tryouts. I don't think so.
Open tryouts. Okay. Fair enough.
Open tryouts for anything. And Wisconsin. I got Wisconsin on the list. So Wisconsin's now 5-2. They beat Northwestern, final Northwestern game on the lake, 23-3. They host Penn State next week. Penn State's coming off a bye, but Penn State might be looking ahead to Ohio State first week in November. This is a team that feels like it's getting better to me.
Okay.
It feels like they've got some momentum. I don't think they're good enough to beat Penn State, but I do think they're good enough to keep that one interesting. And I think given the fact they lost Tyler Van Dyke, feels to me like they have found a way to reclaim their season. And it didn't seem very obvious where things were headed in that moment, but Luke Fickell has done a pretty good job getting this team back to a point of respectability.
Can I give you 3 lurkers?
Please.
Virginia Tech. Schedule's not bad, Ty.
It never was bad. That was why we liked them.
Well, I'm just saying schedule moving forward. They laid waste to Stanford. They comfortably beat Boston College. Georgia Tech at Syracuse. Clemson's difficult, but that's at home.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech has them in Lane Stadium. At Duke and Virginia.
Okay.
Duke's pretty good. Virginia's feisty. It's not terrible. Just in terms of lurking and winning a bunch of games. Second lurker, Colorado Buffaloes.
Yeah.
I don't think Cincinnati's bulletproof. I think they're good. I mean, pretty good. Texas Tech's defense is nothing that does a ton for me. Isaac Wilson, Utah. Down and out Kansas. Down and out Oklahoma State. I'm just saying there's a little bit of that sweet lady Mo with Colorado right now.
Dion goes, what, 10-2, 9-3, and then leaves for Florida State. That's how it happened.
I don't think that's happening. I think he leaves for Amazon Prime is what he leaves for.
Who's your third?
The Vanderbilt Commodores tie. Okay. I grant you this. The Ball State game wasn't great. They get Texas in a huge letdown game next week in Nashville.
Can you imagine if they knock off Texas? Can you imagine?
Not.
Our phone lines melt down.
They've got an Auburn team. Losing is a skill. Auburn has that skill. Nobody loses like Auburn.
No.
Auburn is an elite loser.
Nobody loses like
elite loser.
They're so bad.
Like Hugh Freeze could give TED Talks on losing, and I would pay a premium to go. I would attend them in person. South Carolina. I don't know what South Carolina is week to week. Their defense is crazy good. They're going to make Diego Pavia very scared, but Vanderbilt could win that game. And then, yes, they finished with LSU, Tennessee. But in terms of Vanderbilt as just a spoiler, I don't know, man. Why not?
I mean, does LSU have the defense to stop Diego Pavia?
Does anybody, Ty? Does anybody truly have the ability?
That's the question. I'm not kidding about that.
No, they're a pretty good team. So yeah, those are my lurkers. Sidebar: are you a good lurker in a parking lot where parking is sparse?
Parking lot?
Like you are looking for a parking spot in your car.
Oh,
you need to lurk around that parking lot to look for brake lights for people pulling out.
Elite lurker.
I'm an elite lurker myself too.
Yeah. By the way, Vanderbilt at present stands to have the 6th most difficult strength of schedule in college football.
They're gumpy. They're very gumpy this back half. I can't wait to see what happens.
Why don't we read some fan tweets if you're cool with that?
Oh my God, I'm ready.
Roll. Play.
If I'm not me, who the hell am I?
Don't ask why we play the Arnold quote. We've changed the segment a couple times. We just like the sound. Thank you.
Yeah.
We asked people out on our Twitter account. I am a fan of blank, and right about now, I am feeling blank. We got inundated with responses. We get more each week. What were some of your favorites?
Oregon fan, Oregon, fan freaking tastic. It's from Aaron. Eric, excuse me. Iowa State fan, heartburn. Oklahoma, Nebraska fan, feeling ecstatic that I chose today as my window opportunity to go hiking before the start of the season. Indiana fan, feeling things I've never felt before. You know what, Austin? Good for you. Happy for you.
Yeah.
Michigan fan and both an Auburn and Texas Aggie mom, and I'm feeling the trifecta of losses is coming before the trifecta of wins this season. Iowa fan, I'm feeling as though 25 years may be just enough for Kirk Ferentz. Georgia fan, feeling both confused and excited. Where was the defense all year long? It's a good question. Clemson fan, cautiously optimistic. I think that's fair. Yeah. Baylor, rejuvenated, Ty.
Yeah.
K-State fan, and I'm feeling still pissed off about the BYU game. That's tough. It's going to hang on you. Penn State, relaxed for once. Penn State, as we mentioned, some close calls against some weird teams. Yeah. Your number 3 team in the country? Yeah. Penn State?
Yeah.
Okay. Texas, right at home. Miami fan, feeling relieved. Sooners, at least 2/3 of the known negative emotions. South Carolina fan with a gif of Larry David, feeling pretty good. Kentucky fan, like I'm in a glass case of emotions. And my personal favorite, Michigan State, I'm jacked. I'm jacked to the tits.
Yeah.
From Zach. Michigan State.
I've got Michigan State in this next segment here.
Okay.
I'm calling it Other Snakes because it was Snake in the Toilet Saturday.
Snake in the toilet. Snake in the toilet.
Michigan State beat Iowa, Dan. What the freaking hell?
Well, we were asking the question, like, why is this line what this line is? And I suppose Michigan State eventually was going to find ways to see. It's Nick Marsh, right? The young receiver who has largely been, very good this year. Aiden Childs has been good when he doesn't give the ball away.
Yeah.
And the defense stepped up against Caleb Johnson. I think he just had one long run and that was it.
32-20.
Yes.
Was your final. We're going to give a shout out in a little bit to the kicker, Jonathan Kim, who had a phenomenal day.
Yes.
And scored 20 of Michigan State's points.
Great.
He has 6 field goals and 2 extra points, but
however you can get it.
Look, you're playing Iowa, one in Rome, or when playing Rome. This was a very Iowa-esque performance in how they beat Iowa, but for their defense to step up in the manner that it did, it was a weird line. It felt very strange, but this is a really nice win for Jonathan Smith. A really, really nice win. I kind of can't believe that they did this.
It was a Schneid Saturday too, right? It was UCLA against Rutgers. It was a couple teams finally waking up.
Yeah, UCLA 35-32 knocks off Rutgers. Flew cross country, right?
Yep.
Was that game was in Rutgers, I believe.
It was in Piscataway. Yep.
They snap a 5-game losing streak. Ethan Garbers over 380, had 4 touchdowns, completed 84% of his passes. So good on them. I mean, it probably feels good to get some momentum back.
You know why that happened though, right? Why UCLA was able to wake up on offense finally? Ryan Walters called their offensive plays. Doing it for everybody. Got to make that change.
The Rutgers defense is something that we need to talk to the kids about here. It's the focal point of this team, the whole theory of Rutgers football and why I like them, why a lot of people like Rutgers. They were kind of the it team in a sense before the season. Very strong identity. The identity was they're going to beat your brains in with Kyle Monanga. They're going to run the hell out of the ball, and they're going to play solid defense. And on top of it, the schedule is very advantageous.
Sure.
The defense looked really sloppy, not just in this game, but for a couple weeks now.
Mm-hmm.
The tackling is so bad that if they don't get that sorted out, that's going to be a real issue. That's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, they've lost a couple of huge key players on this defense. I believe it's a couple now, but
I get it.
Man, they I'm
just saying that was the whole theory of the case for Rutgers this year.
Yeah.
Was that.
Okay.
They've lost 3 in a row now. They got to travel, I believe, on Friday night to USC. They've also got Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, and Michigan State. They need to win 2 of those to go to a bowl. I think they could. I think they will. But I'm just saying, if the defense does not get sorted out, it's a whole other conversation for Rutgers.
That's fair.
And then the other, I'm going to put them in the snake category because I said this on the preview show, and I stand by it now, especially since they won, the Florida Gators, man.
Yeah.
Florida.
Just
Florida
keep winning.
Kentucky. They knocked off Kentucky. This team is obviously still pretty flawed. Let's be real. I mean, they're dealing with a lot now. DJ Lagway is going to have his moments, but it's clear he's got talent. They put up 48 points on Kentucky. It might be more an indictment on Mark Stoops and Kentucky at this point that they put up 48 points, but at the same time, their defense actually looked pretty good in this matchup. The rest of the way, they've got some heavy hitters on the schedule. I don't suspect they're beating Georgia or Texas or LSU or Ole Miss. They might beat Florida State, but if
they might beat Florida State,
they should beat Florida State.
Thank you.
But if they can find a way to steal one other one and go to a bowl game against all odds, Billy Napier absolutely keeps the job. Florida getting to a bowl game, it is a possibility now with 4 wins.
Sure.
Them going to a bowl game, despite all of the narratives that have been circling around this program, would be something else. He would have to keep his job. It would be progress. And I don't know if Florida fans would feel great about that, but nonetheless, the fact that we're here, where they've at least got a shot at this, is meaningful, I think.
Can we talk about whatever it is that Texas A&M drinks at halftime to get way better at football?
It's the gummy berry juice, or it's whatever PJ Fleck was given, the antidote of confidence.
Texas A&M gets so much better over the course of games. They might game plan terribly, but they'll figure you out. They will absolutely figure you out. Connor Wegman throws such a beautifully interceptable ball. Nobody puts as much craft and care into throwing a ball that could realistically be caught by the other team. And you know what? He gets away with it. He does get away with it. He's better than Marcel Reed. I love the guys on this Texas A&M defense. I like their receivers a good amount more than I thought I would going into the season. They're thinner at running back than we thought they'd be, but I don't know. This is a really well-coached team. I like Colin Klein. I like Mike Elko. I have no idea to what degree I believe in their lurkiness, but Mississippi State came out with a nice game plan. Michael Van Buren was hitting. They were running really well early on.
The Van Buren boys are going to be a talking point. Not this year.
No, but
I like him. I think he's good.
A&M is just staring at that giant chalkboard with that giant comically large piece of chalk and saying, all right, it's the X factor to the third. Or what, they're solving it. It takes a second, but they're getting there. I like that.
Can I give you like 5 good minutes on the G5?
Please do.
So I think the storyline that most of our listeners out there care about on the G5 level is the Army-Navy thing. The Army-Navy thing continues to churn. This week, they combined to outscore their opponents by a 62-10 score in the first half, Dan.
I love that.
In the first half. Army won with offense. Navy won with pretty much everything. Charlotte turned the ball over 5 times. They didn't look very organized, kind of desperate, even before the first quarter was over.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of note, Navy plays Notre Dame next week at MetLife Stadium. Full coverage of that one coming a little bit later this week. I guess we got to talk about it as a big game because it is not a loaded slate in week 9, and it is a battle of one undefeated team and Notre Dame Fighting Irish is going to be a playoff.
Will be ranked, yes.
Navy's going to be, I would assume they're going to be ranked.
Yeah.
So that is something that I think people care about first and foremost. Beyond that, though, let me go through the conferences. Sun Belt, Coastal Carolina, no longer with a shot of winning the Sun Belt by virtue of getting beaten by Louisiana.
Who's having a really nice year. Were they 6-1 now?
Having a really nice year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really nice year. Georgia Southern seems to be in the driver's seat in the Sun Belt East. They smothered James Madison. Won that game 28-14. Notable.
Yeah.
4 turnovers for James Madison in this game. In the American, outside of the Army-Navy factor, it was a defense optional game as Memphis squared off against North Texas.
Oh, man, I saw this. Chandler Morris threw the ball like 60 times for 450 yards in a losing effort.
North Texas scored 2 touchdowns on their first 2 offensive plays, and then it was back and forth pretty much the rest of the way. Memphis won 52-44.
And that was on the ground, too, right? Memphis was able to, I think they got him on the ground really well.
It was a wild game.
Yes.
They combined for 96 points. North Texas, unfortunately, now kind of on the outside looking in, but I think has, for all intents and purposes, had a pretty good season.
Yes. Mario Anderson, by the way, from Memphis on the ground. A total dude.
Mountain West, San Jose State, very quiet 5-2.
Lurking.
I don't think they're a lurker. I don't want to put them in that.
We'll see. We'll see.
Lurker builds expectations.
Okay.
I don't want any expectations here, but this is Ken Niumatalolo not running the option. They bounced back this week, kind of played in a clunker, but knocked off Wyoming despite committing 8 penalties and turning it over 4 times. Yeah. And they lost the time of possession almost 2-1, but they're 5-2. 5-2. Conference USA is getting spicy. We got Western Kentucky knocking off Sam Houston for all intents and purposes.
Ooh.
It is a 3-team race. Of note, on the Liberty side, their last 5 games are against the top quarter of the conference. So they got to play Jacksonville State and Western Kentucky and Sam Houston in that order.
Okay.
So if you're into G5 football, pay attention to the Conference USA. And finally, the MAC. Man, this is what I said at the start of the year. Just don't look at the MAC in the context of the rest of college football. Consider it its own conference, its own league, in its own bubble. I have no idea how this tiebreaker is going to work. Okay. I don't know who's going to play for it. I don't know who's going to. It's in a blender, as I like to say. More than half of the conference is 2-1 or better.
Great.
It's going to be fun. Okay. They play games during the week. Watch the game.
Maction's heating up.
Maction is heating up. This is your good 5 minutes of G5 football. Thank you to our friend Shay for helping us put that together.
Yes.
Should we do some doodle alerts, Dan?
Let's do some doodle alerts.
Who do we got this week?
9 fingernails, no problem. Curtis Rourke. John Cameron at Baylor, receiver, got in the end zone. Special teams plays. We got a submission for every Kansas State tight end. I love the specificity. Jalen Walker was everywhere for Georgia. He was a menace. He was spying Arch Manning. He was so good in this game. Ethan Garbers, who you just mentioned, was an all-purpose just wonder for UCLA. The battle between Billy Edwards and Miller Moss, super entertaining. Jacoby Lane making a ridiculous catch. Like, this was a very entertaining game. These quarterbacks were both very good. I just mentioned Mario Anderson for Memphis, Ja'Cory Brown, and RJ Harvey for UCF. Got a lot of exercise tonight in a losing effort. Harold Fannin, ho-hum, 10 catches, $170 tie.
Your boy.
And Elijah Badger for Florida had a great night for the Gators with DJ Lagway.
Let me throw 3 more names in there.
Please do.
Tootin for Virginia Tech. They played earlier in the week. 18 carries, 266, and 3 touchdowns.
Ooh.
Jonathan Kim, the aforementioned Michigan State kicker, who went 6 of 7 with field goals of 42, 43, 36, 29, 55, and 46. Also 2 extra points. And Gabe Jackus, I don't know how you say his name, for Illinois. 13 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and had a forced fumble.
Yeah, man. Those are good dudes.
Very good dudes. Thank you for your submissions. We have one final thing before we let the fine people go. We were inundated with phone calls this week. It wasn't even a crazy week of upsets. It wasn't. But we got more phone calls this week than I can remember in a long time. So it's great that we're in the latter now part of October and we're still getting calls like this. Sometimes the calls peter off as you get into October. Teams start losing. Maybe interest wanes a little bit. No. Not the Verballerhood.
What percentage of these calls was about Nel Classico?
Not enough. Here are your Week 8 reverbs. Have a listen.
This is Andy in Philadelphia, donning my puka shells like it's 2004 to say to Oklahoma fans, welcome to the SEC, bitch.
Ty and Dan, Spankin' Dave is back in town.
This is Daniel from Raleigh.
Hey, Josh from Ann Arbor.
It's Sarah in Tulsa, Oklahoma. After today's embarrassment, I just, look, if anyone got a tarmac they're not using, I've got like a whole coaching staff I want to drop off.
Where the Gamecocks come to win a game.
Guys, Indiana is on their way to being 7-0. It's a sold-out homecoming game. Big noon kickoff is there. Cigarettes are cool again. Go Hoosiers.
Just watched my dumb CMU football team blow a dumb 18-point lead on Eastern dumb gray field.
Y'all keep sleeping on the Hokies. It's okay.
Larkin.
We'll hear about
Larkin.
Mike Gundy might have headbutted a cow, but Kalani Sitake just Jean-Claude Van Damme punched the snake in the toilet in the face. I'm drunk on chocolate milk and donuts. 7-0. Go Cougs.
The football gods have passed the spirit stick to Miami this year.
They said there was indisputable visual evidence to overturn that fumble call. It's not indisputable. I dispute it. Wrong.
Hey, just a quick question. I'm a Giants fan from a Michigan fan. When does the Wink Martindale experience work out? Or
Never.
Mm-hmm.
Never.
I am a Cal fan, and I am feeling please hit me as hard as you can.
On a day when Khalil Tate was the honorary captain, it only makes sense that we would watch a repeat of a potential Heisman quarterback meltdown after a coaching change. Have fun in hell, Jed Fish.
I don't give a damn about the whole state of Alabama because I'm from Tennessee. Rocky Top.
Coach DeBoer needs to take a lesson from Coach Saban and bench his starting quarterback.
This is not an overreaction. DeBoer has got to go.
I love that.
Not worth it. We can get someone else. Let's get someone else now.
If winning is a skill, Hugh Freeze is whatever the exact opposite of that is. Also, Scott Frost alert, Freeze has now lost 6 games by 1 score in his first 1.5 seasons. Get the tracker started.
I just want to point out that nobody cares when Colorado wins. They only care when Colorado loses. But guess what? Another week, you guys don't have to worry about it. Let's go, Buffs.
This is Gary from College Park, Maryland. And I will never, ever criticize anyone for storming a field ever again.
Mm-hmm.
Go Terps! Oh, sorry. Someone almost ran me over with a Via scooter.
As an Auburn fan, I thought we'd win a couple conference games this year. Now I think it's time to pack it up, pack it in.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you to one. Thank you to all for calling our reverb line at 855 Reverbs.
Yes.
Thank you to our chief reverbs engineer, Shay, who graciously found the time in his busy schedule to put those together this evening. It was his 10th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
He did that work for us. He did that work for you, Verballerhood.
And now he might be doing more work tonight on his anniversary, Ty. I'll explain that to you later.
Congratulations, Shay. Thank you for all the fine work you put in here. We appreciate that very much.
Of course, the best.
Did an awesome job. He assures us that because there were so many phone calls, there's going to be a part 2. We'll play that on the Tuesday spillover episode, if that's cool.
Can't wait.
All right. So that does it for this week 8. We did our best to put a bow on it. Please do write in solidverbal@gmail.com or leave us comments wherever you can. Whatever it takes, find us on social media. Let us know what we got right, what we got wrong, what we should talk more about on the upcoming Tuesday episode. Of course, if you want to further support what Dan and I do, you can go on out to verballers.com. That is our Patreon. You can get bonus episodes, ad-free episodes, playing the game. We have to give away a gaming console as soon as we find out who won this week. Dan, we give out fabulous prizes each and every week. So We would encourage everybody to check that out if you like the show, want to support Dan and I. If nothing more, hit follow or subscribe wherever it is that you are getting your podcasts these days. And if you were ever so inclined, leave us a rating or a review.
Agree.
Week 8 now officially in the books. We appreciate everybody stopping on by, supporting Dan and I. It is late. We are both bleary-eyed. It has been 12 plus hours of football, but it was a good one.
It was great.
Let's do it again next week, shall we?
Can't wait.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrand, thank you as always for supporting our little pirate ship of a college football show. We will talk to you all soon. Stay solid.
Peace.